What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Comfort Zone Commander podcast, your place for some casual, comfortable Commander conversations. I'm your host, Dan. That's your host, John. John, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be talking about Typal decks. Ones we have, ones we've had, ones we might be building. Are they good? Are they bad? Do we like them? Do we hate them? Do we think that if you play Typal decks, you're the worst? Do you think we think you're the greatest? Who knows? That's what we're going to get into. But do not forget.
Oh, we are still running our giveaway for the sealed set booster box of the Wilds of Eldraine. And if you've been watching, you've been seeing the episodes, guess what? We want this out of our house. Get this box out of here. Somebody win this box.
Please.
I just want to bring you guys joy. All we need, I think, right now is what, 23 more subs? That's it?
Yeah.
And we give this thing away. So, if you aren't subbed already, all you got to do is be one of the first 100 subscribers. And you got to leave a comment on any of the videos during the duration of the challenge. And that's it. You're in. See the video description for the official outlined, more expressive rules. And if you're an audio-only listener, just head on over to the YouTube, same name, the whole 9 yards, and you can enter there. No big deal. But with that out of the way, get comfortable because we're going to dive into this subject. And I'm going to ask this man over here, John, to tell me what the heck is a Typal deck? What does that mean?
So, Typal decks are decks typically built around a specific type of creature. They run creature synergies, they run cards that have to do with having the same creatures. There's a lot of creature types that even kind of synergize with each other, like they are the synergy for the type. And that's really it. Typal decks typically run like combat-based decks. There's a lot of turning things sideways. But for the most part, all you need for a Typal deck is a type, and that's it. That's all you need. You just do that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's like, it's got a couple layers to it. So like Typal decks, again, you know, me and John we go all over the board. So like I have Typal decks I really love, Typal decks I have loved, Typal decks I no longer loved and took apart. You know, I have situations where Typal decks make me like feel really good about what I'm doing, make an easier build direction, and that can be a good element, right? Where like building the deck is a little bit prescribed for me, but I also have situations where I don't like that as much, you know, and I feel like it stunts my creativity somewhat. So I think that Typal decks have like a lot of layers to them, but that's probably the first thing that usually comes to my mind with types is like, what's it doing to my creative process, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely. Not that I would say that you don't like Typal decks, but almost all of my Typal decks, I love everything I'm doing all the time. I really like it. I struggle in build direction a lot of the time. I overthink some of those choices, or underthink some of those choices, and the best way to skip all of that thinking is to just go, this deck has vampires in it. And then I'm done. Let's really, it sounds silly, but like, it helps me narrow down so many choices, so many decisions. I get very bogged down by having too many of those decisions. So being able to kind of not stunt my creativity, but limit my card pool is pretty huge. Now, it's not as common as it used to be because so many types have so much gas. I mean, talk about, you know, your goblins, your zombies, your elves, like the types that have been around for an eon.
Yeah.
There's 100 zillion thousand cards. But I like having a pre-prescribed direction. I think currently I have like 10, if not more, Typal decks in my collection.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting.
I'm okay with it.
Like, I think okay, so I took a weird journey with Typal decks, and we'll get into this when we start talking about our personal collection more. But I used to dislike Typal a lot more than I do now, because I feel like, you know, different Typal strategies or creature types, like you were saying, the ones that have been around for quite some time as well, have gotten a lot more diversified with what you can do with them, just by like the presence of more commander options, the presence of more, you know, Typal synergistic cards that, you know, can point you in one direction or another. I mean, even elves, you brought up, like elves got diversified a ton over the last little bit here. I mean, even in Latra, we got like kind of the Simic elf direction. In sets before that, like Innistradian sets, I believe, is where they introduced like the black-green elves, like so the Golgarian elves.
And Kaldheim. There was a lot of Kaldheim.
Yeah, so like we got like the Golgarian elves. I mean, really, honestly, elves can do quite a few like color pairings. Honestly, you could probably find a way to do every single different at least dual pairing with elves. So with certain types that have enough support, I don't feel as like narrowed in, like, blinders on and like this is the only thing I can do with this. So, I feel like nowadays I have a better relationship with Typal. And also, you guys know me. I love taking a deck idea and then trying to do something that shouldn't be possible with it or something totally whack daddy with it. So sometimes Typal decks are fun for me, not because they restrict my creativity, but they enable me to look at creativity in a new way, which is like, how do I use this Typal deck, which points in a very particular direction with easy to access synergies, and do something more challenging with it? It's going to be like a little bit more expressive of my own personal deck building identity, which again, like we'll hear a little bit more about when we dive into the actual like personal decks that we have in our experience with Typal as a deck building experience. So I think that like, I really think they're doing a good job with Typal nowadays, and revisiting these types, especially with like all the ancillary product we got, like Universes Beyond, things like that. It doesn't like, it's not that I can speak a lot to other formats, but I feel like it doesn't necessarily stagnate like your classic standard and modern formats or whatever with as much Typal as maybe it did in the past when Typal was a lot more dominant in like your core sets. Like we're able to release extra content for Typal strategies in these auxiliary sets, which sometimes just get printed basically right to Commander. Which, like, again, that's kind of like a side conversation that maybe doesn't belong super on this channel, but I feel like that's kind of a good way to not muck up, other formats with too much overpowered Typal synergies while still being able to print that for Commander players, such as when Commander Masters introduced, the Sliver deck and the Eldrazi deck. We were able to touch back on some of those older types like Slivers without the insanity that would have been introducing Slivers back into like standard. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of a way to breathe life into them in this format where they could have gone stale without disrupting other things, which is, I mean, it's really important because you don't, again, not to get too into that part of the conversation, but I don't ever want to get tired of playing a deck or playing a type. I know that I and you, we've both taken certain types and rebuilt the decks, reformatted them. I mean, as I mentioned in our gameplay video where I played my vampire deck, that deck has been mono black, that deck has been Orzhov, that deck has been Rakdos, that deck has been whatever the red, white, black Triome colors is, and now it is back to being mono black. And for like a day and a half, it was Esper colors. So like being able to make those changes and bring that travel of experience into all these different types just makes them that much more interesting and makes so that you're not always going to see the same thing twice. Which is what I think part of the issue used to be. Like, elves were green, and green elves were green, and they were elves, and that was the deck. And like you had said, there's Simic now, there's Golgari, there's even back in Lorwyn was when they had all the Selesnyan elves. So like, there's a lot of different options, and I think keeping those options relevant and using things like Commander decks to breathe that life back into them is a nice way to kind of shift through them. Like, I'm honestly surprised we've never gotten like a Goblin Precon. As I don't think we've gotten one, because that I feel like is a type that really could use something else.
Well, maybe, I think that like it's also about like kind of like trying to spread the love a little bit. Like goblins just have so much gas like across the history, like the annals of Magic, that like they probably, if they haven't, which like I'd have to like really go through the lexicon of my brain, but like if they haven't done something like that, again, it's probably because like there are other types that are probably begging for a little bit more attention, you know what I mean, in order to open them up, let them breathe, or just introduce new cards after like a long period of not having new toys in the sandbox. But Anyway, with that being said, that's generally the vibe with Typal. Of course, feel free to throw down in the comments your thoughts on Typal and its evolution over time. But we're going to jump into this in a little bit more of a personal way. So we're going to talk about some of our decks, our personal deck building experience with respect to Typal, and some of our favorite decks of all time that were Typal based for our own collections. And I think the best way to kind of start this conversation is not to go through a list of all the ones we ever had, because that would be a full episode and it would be very boring. Just reading off the index card, because we've had a lot of experiences. So instead, I think we should start with a little bit of our history. Like, what was your first Typal deck that you put together?
My first Typal deck was, I mentioned it. If you guys comment it, you get virtual high five. So, there you go. It was Elves. Elves was my first Typal deck. It was mono green. I ran Azuri, the Renegade Leader, and the deck was very stereotypical. Elves make mana, which make more elves, which make more mana, and then I float 100 mana and give all my guys +30/+30, and that's the whole thing. I ran Eldraine, which let me play a lot of the elves for free, so I got to skip the whole mana thing. I ran guys that when creatures ETB, you drew more cards. So that deck was a very mono green, deck myself out as fast as possible, and just throw the biggest ball of the biggest elves I could possibly muster right at your face.
Yeah.
And that was the first one.
Yeah, man, I got a billion memories of just glimpse of nature, Eldraine, here's my whole deck, and yeah, you're dead. Just you used to tell a story where, back in the day, when elves existed and we were younger in our Commander journey, about I think it was at one time you went to college or whatever, and these kids were like, oh man, you don't got no strong deck, blah, blah, blah. They were talking some smack, and you were like, okay, bro, how about you guys go 6v1 and I'll pop out elves? Right? Didn't you used to tell me that story? I feel like that happened.
Yeah, so it was that we used to play games at lunch, and whoever won the game, the other guys would chip in and buy that guy lunch that day.
Oh, okay.
And because it was a public group, we weren't a club or anything, but we were all at lunch at college. We're all, late teens, early 20s, a very weird mishmash. I was bringing regular decks. I was bringing my Chandra theme deck when there were 5 Chandras, not 15. I was bringing some of my more everybody can enjoy it kind of decks. Yeah. And that was really when the Niv Mizzet combo deck was really popular in Commander. All sorts of things that at the time I considered a little bit degenerate. But I didn't ever want to just, I was trying to be nice. They were new people. I didn't want to, muddle the whole thing. So long story short, I was then talked down to on more than one occasion. So I said, all right, fine, 6v1 me, arch enemy, and I'll play my elf deck. And I was turn 4, I killed the entire table.
Yep.
So that was that deck in a nutshell.
That sounds about right? Yeah, so that's the thing,
yeah.
Especially I don't know, that's interesting to me. Early days with Typal, I don't know, it might just be a personal experience or not, but we had talked about kind of back in the day, or many of our episodes, everything crosses over. We can reference everything we've said in every episode, so whatever. Go back and listen if you want more context. But the idea of when you're an early Magic player, and also back during that time when we would have been doing this, which was years and years ago, the chase for power is a lot heavier when you're an earlier Magic player, and the easiest way to obtain power, with less complicated build paths, honestly, is a lot of times Typal, which I think is one of the allures of Typal, is that you can get a relatively strong deck, a deck that works relatively well without necessarily having to put in too much of a thought grind, if you will. So Elves was such it wrote itself and its insanity. You know what I mean? It's okay, well, all the dudes that say mana also say elves, and then they say mana for elves, and then you just go so I think that was part of the allure of it, is that it was so easy to achieve such a upper echelon of power. And I would have to admit that I'd be the same, right? Because my first Typal deck ever was, with the exception of our collective garbage dragon deck, which, whatever, don't really count that one, was my Wizards deck. So I used Azami, the Lady of Scrolls, which in a very similar way kind of did the same thing. It was, in a weird way, right? Azami is the lady who lets you tap wizards that you control to draw cards. And because she has the ability on her and doesn't grant the ability, it does not get vetted through like summoning sickness. So if you play a wizard, you can tap it instantaneously to draw off of it, because the ability is vetting through a zombie. So as a result, the deck was very much like in an elf strategy, the same kind of idea. Like, I'm just going to crap out like all these wizards and draw cards off of my wizards to play more wizards, and then draw cards off of my wizards. It was an intruder alarm, to like untap all my dudes every time I play a dude, and, other ancillary ways of getting my mana back in order to do so, mainly through taking extra turns. So wizards lend themselves really easily to like extra turn strategies with massive card advantage and access to obviously blue, so you have all the counter spells to kind of negate people from stopping you from your line. So in a way, like elves, wizards was also kind of that like power hungry, super easy to just achieve like crazy levels of power through a type of strategy. And that was my first deck, which I'm sure you have some memories of as well.
Yeah, as much as like and you have memories of seeing elves hit this like, on turn 4, taking 20-minute turn, playing the whole deck and killing you. I remember sitting through your turn 4, and then your turn 5, and then your turn 6, and then I got a turn 4 sometime. Like, it was a very much a similar thing where, like, those decks played themselves, and there was not a whole lot you could do about either one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, once Wizards got going, there was that one card I literally saw the other day where you could like discard a card to untap a guy.
It's mind over matter.
Mind over matter. Ew. Phenomenal, but ew. Just the same way with the elves. Like, ew. It was just so much.
Yeah, mind over matter. You guys that don't know, basically you discard a card to be able to untap a dude or a thing. And then because in Wizards I can tap to draw, it's basically like discard a card, draw a card. Infinitely accessible to me, so I could just literally burn through the entire library if I needed to, searching for the way to take an extra turn. You know what I mean? So anyway, long story short, like those initial Typal decks, I think were so pushed for power, and they were so easy to access that power, and it wasn't like at least it didn't feel super creative for me after a period of time. Like, it did feel awesome as like a new player, and I felt like I had a lot of ownness on my build. Before I realized how like redundant it was in the community. Like, I thought I was like building something really awesome and that like I obtained some like power through ingenuity and things like that. But because the thing was so prescriptive, like it just kind of wanted you to do the thing. Play more wizards, draw more cards, go infinite, you win. Like, even though I worked really hard to build it, considering like the level of player I was at the time, it ended up looking like a copycat of most of zombie decks. And like the Turgrids of today, it very quickly became that like boogeyman where like if I placed a zombie on the table, people were like, oh, it's in a zombie deck, kill that guy. And like, so I felt like I was kind of robbed of my creativity there because it's like everybody was building the thing that I worked so hard to build. I just didn't know that everybody was building it. And then I also got blasted for building it. So sometimes chasing that power, you know what I mean, it isn't necessarily a great thing that was enabled. And you ended up feeling like a little less creative than you might otherwise, especially when you're building for power, because like the most powerful lines are the most powerful lines. Like, if you are building for optimized power, you're gonna run the same thing as the next guy building for optimized power, because the best cards are the best cards. And back in that day, there was less diversity for selection, which is like we were talking about at the beginning. So I felt like very quickly there was a staleness kind of developing for me with Typal, which led to my next like kind of like, I guess, season of experimenting with types, where I wanted to break away from like the extra turn. I touched a few other like ridiculously powerful types. I tried slivers back in the day. They released that slivers from the vault slivers thing way back in the day, which I was able to get my hands on. And I thought it was so cool, but then immediately it pretty much felt exactly like Wizards did. So I pretty much took it apart like in relatively short-term order. It was just too powerful. Everybody feared it. It was too strong. I think eventually led me out of that. My first kind of like touch point with Typal, which was a little bit more unique and creative at the time, was I actually did Typal walls. that might not sound too crazy nowadays because we have like Archimedes of the Wall enabling and a bunch of other cards that also enable, like toughness matters style strategies. But at the time, I was like the only guy I knew doing type of walls. That was like, you'll learn this about me, but I tend to flip the coin on things. So I didn't like the fact that all of my like Typal decks up to this point were really prescriptive and really redundant, and everybody feared them and knew what was coming. So immediately I'm like, okay, what's like one of the weirdest, most unpopular, underutilized creature types in the game? And I'm like, okay, walls. Here we go. I have a bunch of old random walls and a Rolling Stones, which was back in the day, that in conjunction with this random like gargoyle from Ravnica, like those were the only ways to actually animate your walls for the victory. So it was a really janky deck and it was really fun. But it was kind of my way of answering that problem of I no longer wanted to be like immediately perceived as a threat and everybody to know my deck list immediately because it was so prescriptive. But where did you go after Elves?
So I know that my next two Typal decks, I know what they were, and I remember one of the commanders. Neither of these decks exist today, but I went two ways. I said, well, I really liked what we did with our pile of bad cards dragon deck, because 5-color decks are cool. So I built a Horde of Notions 5-color elemental Typal deck. Nice. And let me tell you, I remember one thing about that deck, and that I was like, this is going to be so much better than the pile of garbage. It sucked. It was terrible. I don't know why or what happened. I don't even remember exactly what Horde of Notions does, but that deck didn't do anything good ever, which was probably just like a deck building fault. But I remember getting very frustrated with it because I was like, Elves. And I had Elves, and I did a little bit of edits here, had a little bit of help from you and edits there, and all of a sudden, Elves was the strongest deck probably that I've ever built. And then I built this Horde of Notions thing, and it was bad. But the other Typal was Soldiers. I was like, I'll get away from the mono green. I'll use 2 colors at the time. I didn't have nearly as much experience with, and I built a red-white Soldier deck. I'm pretty sure I used like Tajik Blade of the Legion, who's the like, on your turn he gets +5/+5. I don't know. But that deck was one of those where it went through a ton of changes, and it was before Boros had impulse draw and card advantage, so it played Soldiers, and that was what it did. And I liked it because it was so much simpler than Elves.
Yeah.
It went one direction, it did one things, and there were a lot of Soldiers, which at the time I felt like gave it a lot more of like, well, my Soldier deck might not look exactly the same as somebody else's, but I could still run a lot of the same, like, Soldiers are Soldiers. Captain of the Watch is Captain of the Watch. It's a great card. But there was some like, well, I'm going to run that uncommon Soldier, and that guy ran that one, so they're like a little different. But the deck was simple. The deck was straightforward, and nobody was ever salty when I pulled that out. Unlike, similar to Uzami, I'd pick a Zuri, and I'd go, oh, okay. And then they'd see the draw card, or they'd see a learn, or they'd see the Nature's one, and they'd go, uh-oh.
Yeah. Well, I think that you bring up an interesting point, like, that I think is exactly a great example of kind of what I was hinting at, right? Is like, Soldiers stands as a great example of the idea that, like, again, these types that get more attention or just like diversification over time allow for the diversification of like stratagem, and that eliminates the problem of redundancy, which a lot of random words I didn't have to use to basically say you could do different things with Soldiers, like you were saying you could do, and you've been through so many different iterations of it, which is funny to like kind of walk down the history, because I remember that guy. And then I think that the glory days of Soldiers for me was back when it was Erois.
Erois just took that deck and was like, all right, so you want to attack because they're Soldiers. So let's make that not a problem so they can't die, and let's give him Menace, because why not? He was such an upgrade as a single card.
Yeah,
you're right.
Which is a cool thing that they do on occasion, it's kind of like the Tovolar conversation that we have had in our, like past podcast episodes, and presumably we'll see in our future episode. Spoiler alert, stick around for that one. But Tovolar answers a problem with respect to werewolves in that it enables the card advantage that it was desperate for and a way to kind of flip the werewolves. So it's R&D's way of kind of like prescribing a commander that answers some issues where Typal decks might be kind of begging for it. And I feel like Aroa's kind of answered that for soldiers, with the exception of obviously like answering the card advantage issue, but that's been a problem for like a very long time with red, white, color combination. But it did give you like a, hey, like these guys love to go to combat, but like things are getting a little dicey out there. So how do we make that like not a problem, like you were saying? And I feel like Erois was one of those situations where it's like, oh, this is awesome. We can make a Boros guy that's literally like, you win combat. He's like a Dolmen's Gate and like an evasion, pseudo evasion enabler. So I think those were really the glory days. Honestly, like now that I'm thinking about it, like during this episode, I didn't even remember that. Now I'm thinking about it. I kind of miss classic Boros Erois soldiers. It was a pain in the butt to deal with. Don't get me wrong. I probably complained a few times about the fact that Erois is busted 4 mana and has a destructible, but I miss it. It was kind of fun to play against. I know that eventually you went into recently, right? Like, didn't you have soldiers? Oh yeah, with what's his name? Optimus, right? But you didn't keep it together.
Yeah, I took like a quick second, and it's funny that you mentioned it because I have the pile of Boros soldier stuff just sitting there. So maybe it's something I could pull back for you guys, and for you especially if you like playing against it so much. But I took the deck and I was like, I don't have any Jeskai decks, so I took Optimus Prime, like the Universes Beyond vehicle living metal flip guy, and I was like, what's more soldier than an America Colors led by Optimus Prime, like red, white, and blue soldier deck?
Very soldier.
And I maybe played it half a dozen times, and then I had to take a lot of those cards out for things in my Urza deck, which is not technically soldier typal, but there were a couple of cards in that deck that synergized with Urza did, so Optimus Prime got... Yeah. So that's that.
But I think it's an interesting example, right, of like, again, like that idea. Like, look at all the phases and changes that happened with that deck and like the stages that it went through in its development. And I think that's enabled by like the diversified card development like strategies. Like, obviously, I feel like the best example of that, or like one of the best examples of that, is going to be dragons. I mean, who the heck hasn't tried a dragon typal at some point? And we're playing Elder Dragon Highlander, like the OG commanders for this format were pretty much like the Elder Dragons. I don't know, like I wouldn't speak confidently to the back of the day if like that was like literally what you were supposed to use, like when it was first designed. But when I first started playing, like that was a very common thing to go to the original Elder Dragons as potentials for your commander, many less legendaries, and that was what the format was named. So I myself have tried dragons like a million different iterations and ways since our original pile of garbage Scion the Ur Dragon, and then I believe I maybe tooled up Scion for myself for a period of time. I don't really remember. But eventually, like I tried a Tarka, I believe its name is. I think it's the dragon that does it gives double strike to your dudes.
She's Gruul double strike.
Yeah, it was the OG Atarka. I know they made another one. So I had OG Atarka for a period of time. I had Intet the Dreamer, which I had like a small dragon presence in. I've always wanted to revisit that deck because I love Intet. That art is awesome. The name is awesome. It's just a really cool card. But later, I finally built one that I think is probably going to be my dragon deck. I just have to kind of work it into the way I like it. It wasn't feeling so great in its first iteration because I built it specifically to be better understandable for a new player, because at the time I was helping to kind of teach my wife how to play. And I really wanted to get her from this level of, thinking about your own deck and doing like more like solitaire combat style stuff and thinking about other players' decks, thinking more interactively at flash speeds, things like that. So I had built a Renari deck, which is the dragon guy from one of the Baldur's Gate type things.
It's Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, so he is a choose a background dude. So between him and his background, which is the Acolyte of whatever, it was a Simic dragon build where the Acolyte of
Bahamut.
Yeah, Bahamut. Thank you. It reduced the cost of your first dragon spell on each turn by 2, so you could have it reduced on other players' turns as well. And then Renari enabled you to play your artifacts and dragons as though they had flash. So it was a really interesting kind of strategy of the build. I wanted to build like kind of control dragons, if you will, where I'm basically keeping up my mana to be interactive and responsive with counter spells and things of that nature. And then in the like absence of a threat or incentive to utilize that, I can, put out some mana rocks. I can put out a quick dragon at a cost reduced amount, like be really interactive with it. I ended up kind of getting the ratios a little bit wonky, so it didn't feel as good to pilot as I want. I'm just reworking it. I will eventually have it back together. But long story short, I feel like that is a great example, probably one of the best examples, again, of a type that is so well diversified, has so many pieces and strategies and legendaries and directions to choose from, with Miram and the Ur-Dragon and blah blah blah. Like we have these guys who like obviously sit as like here's this again, but they like there's so much diversification. I mean, even you have a totally other different take on a dragon commander.
Yeah, I mean, I had put Miram together not as like Miram, but I had put the deck together for a couple of months as like literally I took all the Baldur's Gate dragons, like the commons and the uncommons, and I was trying to make like a weird, like, I'm going to use like the 2 for a 2/2 first strike dragon noble guy. Like I tried to make like a weird dragon deck. I, for years, have been making changes and editing a Rakdos dragon deck. I first put it together around when you had a Tarka, and I built Kolaghan.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were both like dragons from that block, the Fate Reforged, Khans of Tarkir, the Tarkirian dragons. It is currently my, if you guys have seen it, it is currently my Rakdos Reanimator dragon build with Rivaz. But that deck had a lot of changes, and I also, spoiler, took some of the lands and stuff out of that America Soldier deck, and I have a Zurgo and Ojutai sitting somewhere over on the shelf that I've mentioned. So, like, that's another, and the list has not a single overlap of dragons in the red-black dragon deck. I did it on purpose, and I'm excited to put it together, hopefully, maybe. Yeah. But so even that, like, between the two of us, we've built, like, 4, 5, 6 different color combinations to dragon decks. Yeah, and they all function differently. They all function very differently.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I think that, like, sometimes I know that we like a lot of times like there's some negativity out there about like the density of legends being produced and stuff like that. And I know that it has impacts on other aspects of the game. We've talked about this as well, but in situations like this, I love that about dragons. Like I really love that there's so many directions to go with it to take advantage of those synergies and these really cool cards without necessarily looking like a copycat of everything else out there. Especially for me, since I crave that uniqueness, I crave that like, hey, what does that do? What's that card experience? Like, that's really cool for me because I can be a part of the dragon experience without necessarily having something that's really redundant, prescriptive, and everybody knows exactly what I'm going to play every single time I pull the deck out. I mean, again, just between the two of us, the fact that we were able to both pursue this deck idea in so many variable ways is really awesome. But I think that's really where Typal is kind of sitting right now, in most of the types that are available. There's still some that could use a little bit more love. Humunculus! No, I'm just kidding. But I think that's a good point to kind of talk about, like, what are some of our, like, favorite Typal decks that we have in the roster now. And we're going to do, like, a bit of a top 3 for you guys to kind of, we're both, like, not really in love with favorites. It's hard. We have so many freaking decks in our collection, and they all get a little love here and there. Some of them rotate out after a while, but they keep a special place in the heart, and then we have new ones. So favorites are a hard conversation, but we're going to do it for y'all. So we're going to try to break down our top 3 favorite Typal decks of both of our collections here. So what is your number 3, or maybe in no order? I don't know. What's one of your top 3s?
I'm gonna have to go with no particular order on this one. But as far as the types go, I have a god. If you guys have seen, I have my god Typal deck, and as much as that might not, it's not as interesting necessarily as some of the other types out there. I love the way I was able to construct that deck and its type and its theme. So it's a 5-color deck. It's led by the Prismatic Bridge, or Essica, whatever her name is. But the Prismatic Bridge is the commander that we cast. And I run all, I think, of the gods that I could get my hands on from the Theros block. The Theros blocks, I run almost all of them. So the whole theme is that they're gods and we're working with devotion. And the problem I had with that deck, it's a little bit twofold, is that a lot of the gods cost a lot of mana. So I put a treasure sub-theme in that also kind of works with, you present treasures as you're like worshipping the god. Like these are your sacrifices, the things you're giving to them, the things you're laying at their feet. And the problem of devotion. So I ran the set of 10 like avatar or whatever they're specifically called, deities from the Lorwyn block, because they're all, almost all, but I think all, 5 color pips, and they have hybrid mana value. So something like the hybrid white-green functions as 5 white devotion and 5 green devotion. So most gods will get turned on by even a single one of those in their color pip, and all of the 2-color ones, obviously you have the 2-color pip ones, get activated through that. So there was a lot of like interesting things that I think I was able to do with that deck, and it's a lot of fun to play, and it is terribly annoying to deal with because all the gods have indestructible. And I really like it. It is a little different than a lot of my other type of decks.
Yeah, I really like gods specifically because of how like thematic it is. You know what I mean? You have like the lowly like humans, you know, not that you play humans, but the idea of like creating the treasures to like show that devotion, and then you have the lower level like, you know, deities, and then you have the gods, you know what I mean? So like I really enjoy like that kind of like classic Grecian, you know, Therosian vibe to it, which is really cool. So for me, I don't know, I guess I'll go no particular order. Maybe I could order it for you guys. I guess I'll probably say like my number 3 is a bit of a tie, so this might be a bit of a cheat, but I'd probably put my dinosaur deck and my sea monster deck at tied for the 3rd tier there. So briefly, I mean, they're pretty much very simple, so there's not much to say about them. They don't do much that's relatively unique to what their Typal is. However, the dinosaur one is helmed by Gesheth. You guys can see it on the Dinosaur Train, Vampires on a Dinosaur Train episode. But long story short, very simple. The idea is get Gesheth as soon as possible, turn it sideways, and hopefully flip out a bunch of dinosaurs. Of course, we have the double flapping, mix slapping daddy Zatalpa in there, or whatever his name is. So he's a fun hit. And then, you know, we got the big what's the big lord guy? Huge 3-headed dino dude. What's that guy's name?
Something of Calamity?
Zakama. Is it Zakama? I don't know. I haven't played that deck a long time. But yeah, so we get to just flip out these huge baddies. So dinosaurs is one of those things that feels like similar to dragons, except maybe it's like a little bit more on the unique element. And it's dinosaurs. So like I was a dino kid. I don't know about y'all out there, but like Ankylosaurus, bro, clubtail, that thing got me like through many a hard time. Just sitting there thinking about him. Just like, oh man, life's rough. But Ankylosaurus at one point existed. So that's cool.
I was a Triceratops kind of guy. Triceratops are
yeah, actually, this is a good one. Shout out for your comment for this episode. What dinosaur were you, baby? What was your favorite one? What could you not get enough of? Parasaurolophus, bro? Pachycephalosaurus, dog? Come on. Shout it out. Anyway, I was a dino nerd, so obviously like dinosaurs, I just love them. I guess the reason why it's not higher up for me is just because it's very like simple and the objective is really straightforward, so it doesn't feel as creative. It's just kind of like aggro, mana ramp, here's some dinos. But I definitely love seeing the cards, and dinosaurs just like, man, I love it. But in conjunction with that, I probably tie it with sea monsters, which I tried like a bunch of iterations of like a Kraken or sea monster base idea. And then they finally released that dude, Kinesis, who is like the scry enabler. He increases your scry count by 1 anytime you scry, and then he lets you cheat dudes off of the top. which we haven't seen on the channel yet. So shout out if you want to see that one. But basically, that's a great way to cheat in some Krakens and do some really interesting, like, Simic-y, crazy stuff. Simic's nuts. So scrying, putting in sea monsters, it's a lot of fun, but it's pretty straightforward. So I think both of those would kind of take that 3 slot of, it's comfortable, it's easy, it's Typal, it's fun. I get to do some big wackadoo stuff. But they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, the Sea Monster deck is really cool because it took you a long time to get that deck to a place where it was like not playable, but playable in a lot of ways. Like a lot of the early iterations, especially, were like turn 1, Quest for Ula's Temple, fingers crossed. It happens maybe one day.
Yeah.
And that was like that deck felt very lackluster, whereas Genesis, like in the games that we've played, like you consistently slap down these like kind of like rudely good because they're free serpents and sea monsters and krakens. Like some of them are ridiculously strong. And I love dinosaurs. Like I remember we had talked about it at some point about like one of us needed to build it, and I know you did, and had you not, I 100% would have. I like dinosaurs, and I get a very similar vibe to them as something like soldiers, like I had talked about, where like they know, the dinosaurs know what they're doing.
Yeah.
There's the synergies that make sense. There's some really strong singular dinos. There's some really strong dinos that synergize with other dinos, but you know what you're doing. It's Nea colors. You're slapping dinos.
Yeah.
That's it, which I really like. Again, I will never be unhappy to see or play against that deck.
Yeah,
ever.
for sure.
Never.
What's your next one?
My next one, and again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but my bear Typal deck. Bears are my favorite animal by far. And for so long, I knew that there were bears, and I knew that bear was like a style. It was almost like a running thing that like a bear was a 2/2 for 2. But there was not gas. It just wasn't there. And I tried putting the list together when they printed a Eula. I was so excited. And I just still like it. It just wasn't there. Like there was just nothing. I needed something else. So when they finally printed Wilson, as much as the deck is straightforward, mono green, I play bears, it just feels nice to have a solid bear, a 2/2 for 2, with like 18 abilities in the command zone, and they choose a background, which I toiled over making the deck Golgari when I was first building the list, but I really wanted it like true to form, mono green. I'm gonna play bears. That's it. And that is all the deck is. Cards that make my bears bigger, cards that double their power, evil Phyrexian things that let me pay life for mana. They're bears, and it's bears, and it feels like bears. And being able to just have that makes me really happy, and it is a really good deck that I have that I can bring anywhere. I'm really passionate about the way it plays, and the cards that I run in it. And who's ever sad to see a pile of grizzly bears? Like,
I'm sorry, but is mortally hilarious to me, like almost killed me, with the exception of wanting to laugh too loud to cut you off, when you were like, evil Phyrexian things that let you pay life for mana. It's bears, more bears. Which is the hilarious shout out to the random inclusion of Defiler of Vigor, because like, how could you not? I mean,
and Zopendrill. Zopendrill's another Phyrexian.
Oh, you have Zopendrill. Yeah. So like a little tiny bit of that evil in there, a little bit of that Phyrexian juice. I mean, they did invade everything, so and that counts.
Yeah.
So for me, well, yeah, actually, sorry, I like bears. Yeah, sorry, I totally forgot to say that. Bears is amazing. There's not much else to it. So like, bears be bears, and I like bears because it's not like overwhelming. I don't know, it never feels bad to play against it. I don't really love a Eula. I just feel like she's so pushed at 2 mana, so I'm really happy that she's not in your command zone. No judgment to people that like Eula. I just like, she's one of those things that's a little bit hard to deal with such repeatable removal at such a low CMC curve, just so easily accessible. So like, Wilson is probably one of the reasons why I like bears the most, is that it doesn't get like that and become that kind of like oppressive feeling. But it's purist, and I love it, and it's a shout out to like some IRL fan base, animal fan base, so that's cool. For me, I got to shout out to my IRL animal fan base, and that's Eldrazi. Because my favorite animal be them noodle monsters, baby. We be loving that, sorry. We be loving that Scientology pasta man in the sky, so obviously we had to do it. So my next up, my problem number 2, and this is problematic. I realize this is a problematic choice, and don't worry, I don't bring this out very often, but it is still probably my second favorite deck because of the way it plays. But you would have seen it if you guys have checked out the episode. I don't even remember what we called it. Waste Not, Want Not. Go take a look if you want to see what this deck is all about. But basically, Urza Battlethopter is my commander who enables Flash from my colorless spells. So it's my favorite way to play Eldrazi. And to be honest with you guys, I just love Eldrazi. I know it's a problematic thing to love, but who can I am who I am. I was here when Eldrazi were first on this earth, when they first were terrorizing the Zendikarian elements and eating up some mana of all the realms. And Emrakul, baby, the Aeon's Torn, like what the heck? The Ulamog, what was the first one's name? I don't even remember.
Infinite Gyre.
Yeah, Infinite Gyre, Infinite Gyros, baby. Who doesn't want that? Like Ceaseless Hunger, Butcher of Truth. Sorry, okay, I'm fanning out, but I'm just saying, like, they had this feeling of, like, again, at the time, like the biggest creature prior to them was, I believe, Krozen Skyscraper or Cloud Scraper or something, which was just like a random crappy old card, 13/13, I think, something like that. And then here come the Eldrazi, and this is something like we never saw, and it's insanity, and you have to pay like crazy mana to get these big old bombs, and I played them in Standard, and it was beautiful. And I just have a special place in my heart. I think the design space for them is really interesting. I love this idea of like this like apocalypse level, threat, like threat level 5, like the end of everything, and I think it was really well handled, like when they were originally introduced. So I love them. I had to shout them out eventually. I had to make a deck that worked with them. So here comes Urza's Battlethopter, and it was just, it was perfect. Liberator enables Flash, so I can play the deck more interactively and responsively and put my threats out at the right moment, which just makes it like feel a little bit more interesting. Like, otherwise it's not functioning too terribly different, but being able to stack my decisions responsively makes the deck kind of like play more interactively, even though at its core it is just like, I'm going to ramp up and then I'm going to play Eldrazi. But I also get to play cool cards like, Planeswalkers when I can drop them out at instant speed, like Karn and Ugin, and then go to my turn, untap with them, have them a little bit buffered and safe, and now I have them out and I can activate their ability immediately. I can take advantage of some cards like the new weird tower card from the Eldrazi Precon, which allows you to cast a thing for free on each player's turn with enabled with Flash. It's just really strong. I don't remember the name of the card right now, but you'll see it if you go look it up. Anyway, I don't know. It's there's not like a ton to say about it. It is at the end of the day just like dropping down huge bomb style Eldrazi's. I wish OG Emrakul was unbanned. I know. Flame me. Send me to heaven down in the comments and take my name down and smudge it with red and all this stuff. But I'd love Emrakul. I want to be able to play that big, beautiful beastie. Anyway, that's enough. I just love Eldrazi.
Yeah.
I got a soft spot in the heart for him. I'm sorry. I know that they're a horrible pain in the butt to play. I do not pull this deck out against like random tables unprepared. I would never do that. I play it very rarely, but it is a ton of fun when I get to do the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's always tough for me because every single time I am thinking about like the play experience against that deck is I'm like, oh, it's just colorless deck. Cool. And then you ramp up and play Big Eldrazi and I get split right in half because I'm like, oh no, I can't do anything about that. But also, oh cool, these are so cool. Like, I remember, it's a weird thing because you remember using them in Standard. I remember them eating me alive in Standard because I didn't play Eldrazi. Yeah. I was playing like Palaka Worm Elf Ball for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah.
There was some living lands at the time. I was doing all kinds of weird non-Eldrazi stuff. So I have almost like a throwback to like, I remember how absolutely ludicrous they were and how ludicrous they still often are. So it's a weird thing because I have this odd admiration for like watching that deck and you're like, all right, so at the end of your turn, I'm going to play Emmerich or, Kozilek. And I'm like, oh, at the end of my turn. So like I already used all my stuff. Yeah, I mean, okay, like it's a weird thing, but it's also like it's almost awe-striking, like even still, even with all the amount of power creep and other things we've seen in Magic, still like you drop the Eldrazi and you're like, whoa, which I think is almost like a testament to how cool they were because of how cool. Again, if you don't like them, that's fine, but like I still, as much as I fear them, that is part of why I like them so much because they're still these emblematic, terrifyingly powerful cards.
Yeah.
As far as my number one, I didn't do this in any particular order. And it's really, really, really hard for someone who has like a dozen, 10 or 12 or whatever Typal decks, but I gotta go with my Vampire deck.
Oh.
It was my first standard deck. It was especially my first one that was able to even do anything. And I've taken it through so many iterations, but it's one of the few decks that I've never not had playable. Some of the others, like I had the Rakdos Dragon deck, and then I took it apart. It was unplayable. It was not sleeved up to play. And then I made a new one, put it back in sleeves. Soldiers, the same thing. Elves kind of had like a reformation into something else. But it is the one Typal deck that I've always had, always playable. And I've been through such a journey with it that I just love playing it. There are a lot of arts and cards I run in the deck that are the exact same cards I used in my standard deck more than a decade ago. That was a long time ago. And I get the same flashbacks, some of the same cool interactions, but also so many new interactions. The deck's currently mono black. So I get a little bit of taste of what they did in the further Innistrad sets. A little bit of a taste of what they added when they went to this and that plane, this and that city, this and that color combination. Even some of the weird Esper, like the blue stuff, because it's blue-black. I get a little bit of everything because Vampires always had black in it somewhere. And it's just such a satisfying deck to play. It's not weak, but it's not hyper-powered. It's a streamlined throwback mono black deck that I really like it. I'm never not gonna have a Vampire deck, which I like it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like Vampires to me takes the cake for like that nostalgia pick, right? Which we've talked about a few times here, but once you've played Magic long enough, you only you start nostalgia baiting yourself, which is a cool thing. I mean, it feels good. Everybody loves a good dose of nostalgia, and I don't know, having a deck you can go back to where it's you can see the history, you can see the annals of, where this deck came from, where, where it's going, cards, like you said, that were in the original build, your OG card, I have a Duran the Siege Tower, who's my favorite card. I say my favorite card. It's always been my go-to for my favorite card in Magic, but it's because I used to love Tree Folk. I played Tree Folk in Standard. They're not one of the things I'm going to talk about necessarily here, but my first ever Duran the Siege Tower, I was so set on remembering that it was my first that I actually, and this is a sin, but I actually scratched the front of the card slightly with my fingernail, not so much to remove the ink, but just to create a slight markation so I would know that it was always my first Duran. And I know that sounds so crazy, and I don't even know, I'm almost embarrassed to admit it on the channel. I was super young anyway, but it's kind of crazy to this day though, because I still have him, and even that becomes a level of nostalgia, remembering my 12-year-old self being I want to remember, and giving a little mark to it. And now I do. And it's crazy. And I'm almost 30 and I'm wow, my first Duran,
Yeah, I mean, if you scratch the card today for any reason, I would immediately call 911.
Yeah.
Because I'd think something was
wrong. Well, it certainly wouldn't be what I do now, but there is that nostalgia there. So that's the way I feel about Vampires, even as your like brother and like seeing when you pull it out and being like, yo, the Calastria Highborn that you've had for like 20,000 years in foil, and it's super cool. And like random like tiny things like that, it just like felt really good about it. So I like it from nostalgia. My last pick, my number one, it's a bit of a cheat, and it's like one of my more high power decks. So I don't like, it kind of feels weird to put it at number one, but it hits a vein that like is just so important to me. Again, just like to be unique, be creative to the best of my ability. So it's actually going to be my Atla Palani deck, which is it's a shapeshifter Typal, using like Typal synergies as the theme. So I touch on a bunch of different Typal synergies with the idea that my shapeshifters, my changelings, are going to be considered something of every type. So even though like it's a little bit of a cheat, the idea of the original deck that I created was taking advantage of the fact that I am cross Typal to use specific pigeonhole Typal synergies in conjunction with one another at the same time. So for example, like in the original build, I had my main subtypal focus was dragons. So I had like Utvara Hellkite. I had that like one dragon mana rock, which is like the gold pile or whatever that gets counters for casting dragons or whatever. You can utilize them to draw cards. I even had Crucible of Fire or whatever that gave your dragons +3/+3 as like a sub backup win con or whatever. But again, like the list goes on and on. I run the rabbit dude, or whoever, the Preston, the bunny magician dude, who allows you to sacrifice your illusions to exile stuff or whatever, as well as obviously duplicating your shapeshifters as they come in. Just a bunch of different things. I mean, really honestly, the list goes on and on. I have that one dude who doubles like triggers from shamans or wizards that you control, which interacts favorably with my commander, who is a shaman, but it also interacts with any like triggered abilities that I have on, or activated abilities that I have on my changeling. So there's a bunch of like interaction. Obviously at the core is the egg interaction with Atla Palani, who basically whenever an egg dies under your control, you get to flip off the top and then hit another creature and put it into play, which lets you kind of chain out the deck. So it's really high powered. It's one of my more like combo-y, like CDH style decks. So it's weird for me to kind of put it here as like one of my number ones, but it's not necessarily because of the way the deck plays out. And it's more like the heart of the build, at its core, taking advantage of like the multi-type. Oh, dude, my favorite guy, Utopia Micron or Mycon or whatever his name is. Yeah. Again, another really cool thing. He's a 1 green mana dude who lets you sacrifice saprolings to add any color mana to your mana pool. So again, like the idea of like being able to cast out a changeling, and I get like a trigger here to put a counter on to draw because it's a dragon. I get a trigger here to double up one of its triggers because it's also a wizard. I get to sacrifice it into here to make a mana because it's a saproling, and then I get to flip because it's an egg. And it's like, it's kind of that like defying the mold idea that I love so much. It's like, okay, Typal is like pick a type and then dive in. I'm going to like not do that, and I'm going to pick every type all at once and take advantage of multi-typal synergies where they're supposed to be these pigeonhole build paths, and I'm going to diversify that as much as possible. And it's really strong, and it's really fun, and it's really successful, and it just brings me a lot of joy to pilot it, even though I know that it gets a little combo-y. So again, just like kind of the Eldrazi, I don't pull it out very often, but when I get a game where the rules of your combo is like, hey, we're going to pull out all the stops, it's a lot of fun to pilot, and I really like kind of taking that different perspective on Typal, which again wouldn't really be possible without R&D kind of helping the situation out. So I really think Typal has come a long way, and even strategies like that exist, and they're possible. We've all seen a bunch of like shape shifter nonsense, in some way or another. So, but that wraps it up. That's our list. Which, again, like we got a lot more, we're keeping it a little brief. I say ironically, given that we're probably at like an hour or whatever at this point, but, that's kind of a brief dive into what Typal is, our history with Typal, our favorite decks with Typal. And now, of course, you guys know the deal. We want to hear from you. As per usual, we're just two dudes out in the multiverse.
Just
2 men having this conversation randomly on a podcast that you're listening to in your car or on lunch break or whatever. We need to know what you think. What do you guys got? Do you like Typal? Is it something that you kind of find as like an annoying build path, or one that you really love that enables a lot of cool strategies for you? What's your favorite Typal deck? What's your favorite type in Magic? I would love to know, and I'd love to see them as well. So definitely link it up. You know what I mean? Get involved. We're very curious up in here. And don't forget, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe down below. Be one of the first 100 subscribers. Leave one of those comments we asked you to do, and you're entered to win that box, baby. But that's about it, guys. Thank you for being comfy with us. We love you. And as always, we're going to talk with you in the multiverse.